So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the third and final week of our 2025 Plus Connect Plus Forum programming. If we go to the next slide, as we get started, some housekeeping tips. We are recording this webinar. The recording will be available to view on demand within the next week on CDFI Connect and on our YouTube channel. We encourage you to use our chat function to introduce yourselves, share comments, and interact with other attendees, just like many of you are already doing. We've allotted about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for audience questions. So we'll collect questions as we receive them in the chat and Q&A box, and then we'll respond to them during the dedicated Q&A portion of today's conversation. We go to the next slide. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsor. This webinar and all of this year's Connect Plus Forum programming was developed with support from our partners at the Citi Foundation with the intention of helping build and facilitate access to tools, skills, and expertise that will help CDFIs and other mission-driven lenders more effectively meet their missions. When we go to the next slide. For those who are new to us, the Connect Plus Forum is OFN's annual virtual event for the industry that's focused on delivering action-oriented conversations on pressing topics in our members' work. This year's theme is CDFIs and technology. Through a series of webinars and office hours this month, we've been exploring the role of technology in our field and within our organizations, from emerging trends to the nuts and bolts of system implementation. Our goal is that through these sessions, you'll come away with new perspectives and actionable strategies for integrating tech into your work. We kicked off the forum with a conversation on how to move beyond buzzwords to build a tech-ready culture. Last week, we shifted to execution, focusing on the how and when of technology adoption and implementation. We also hosted office hours for members on cybersecurity, data privacy, and how to work smarter and not harder. Today, we hone in on one of the most complex and transformative areas of technology, artificial intelligence, or AI. As AI continues to rapidly advance, it's easy to feel swept up by the sense of urgency and mounting pressure to decide whether and how to adopt these new AI tools. It's important that CDFI practitioners not lose sight of the bigger picture, how we use tech to achieve our mission, and not as the end in and of itself. The goal of our conversation today is to take a step back and consider the broader context of AI and its relevance for the community development finance field. And so if we go to the next slide, I'm excited to introduce the speakers who will be sharing their insights on this topic, starting with Bulbul Gupta, the President and CEO of Pacific Community Ventures, or PCV. It was actually a conversation that I had with Bulbul last year that inspired today's webinar, so really thrilled to have her moderating this panel, which includes Dr. Michael Akinwumi, the Chief AI Officer at the National Fair Housing Alliance, and Laura Kosian, founder and lead marketing strategist at Stop Whispering. Our fourth panelist, Alex Lertzman, CEO of Coral Data, unfortunately had a personal emergency and won't be able to join us today. Our thoughts are with Alex and his team, and we hope to have him share his insights at future programming. We intentionally curated this blend of leaders from within and beyond the industry to discuss key ethical and practical questions to help ground decision-making about AI adoption at your organizations. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Bulbul to get us started.
Thanks, Sindhu, and thanks so much to the OFN team for hosting this important conversation at this time. There's certainly a lot, as Sindhu was setting up the conversation. Over the past year, we have seen a lot more interest and asks from various stakeholders in our community development financial industry around the use of AI, how our organizations, our clients, small businesses, et cetera, are using AI or considering using AI. I think it is a really timely conversation to just sort of take a pause and think about what are the use cases, what are the guardrails, and how do we think about the responsible and ethical use of AI in our field? Part of the reason that Sindhu referred to the conversation we had last year is because prior to coming in as the president and CEO for Pacific Community Ventures about 5 years ago, I spent 2 years co-founding a responsible AI and technology think tank in Berkeley, California, and thinking about sort of how is AI used to automate and accelerate tools and tasks, but also how are we then using AI to design sort of behavioral nudges and interventions that actually have the potential to maximize human potential as we think about the future of learning and the future of work. So really very focused on sort of workers and people, and how do we design these systems to actually maximize our human critical thinking and potential and not sort of replace it or outpace it. So when I think about this conversation, there's a couple of things I wanted to sort of bring into the ethical considerations around this topic. One, is my prior boss, an AI expert, sort of taught me, one, before you start to sort of be a hammer looking for nails, really think critically about what is the problem that we are trying to solve for here, right? What is it that we are facing in our organizations, in our field? And therefore, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And what human versus technology solutions do you need to solve that problem before you start to identify those tools and right sort of potential technologies to help you tackle that problem? I think the other thing I think a lot about in this role now as an organization that is also has a data analytics team and is starting to use AI in certain use cases is to also sort of slow down as much as we can to not be accelerating the use of AI in our field or work because of either funder or investor interest, but again, to be super problem driven versus funder driven. PCV's motto for many years has been to be a data-driven, people-powered organization. And it is a value we hold prior to even having these conversations around AI in our field. And so I thought I would start this conversation with just sharing with you 6 of the value statements that we at PCV have designed into our ethical AI policy that we're planning to publish probably later in March with one last sort of board approval that set the frame for this conversation. 1, we must ensure that the benefits of AI used minimize the harm created, and it must not harm any group or individuals disproportionately, acknowledging that some harm is inevitable from most technologies or policies. 2, we strive to select AI that has been trained on disaggregated data to prevent disproportionate harm or discrimination of any group or persons by the use of that AI system. 3, the AI system must never be used to discriminate against or exclude individuals or customers or groups during the course of business. 4, AI systems used at PCV must be at all times prioritizing and safeguarding customer privacy and data rights. First, to protect that data from abuse or monopolization and to ensure that we are abiding by loan level privacy laws as we're obligated to. 5, the AI system should be used to inform and support human decision-making and not be unsupervised or act as an autonomous system, i.e. do not remove humans from the critical decision-making process. And lastly, PCV will not use autonomous AI to make lending decisions without a change to its executive policy, pending CEO and board approval. So I bring all of that in just to introduce in sort of ethical and value statements that we have spent the last 1.5 to 2 years and internally in our data working group at PCV to get to and bring in my speakers on our panel who also really bring some really valuable expertise and backgrounds and considerations in entering this conversation. And I'd love to turn to each of them to introduce themselves a little bit further, both what their role is and what organizations they represent, but also to provide us with sort of one frame of mind they're coming in with about the benefits or opportunities, as well as a risk that they're grappling with in the current use of AI in their organization or field. Laura, I'd love to start off with you. I know we had the chance to work together in the report that you published a few months ago, but Laura Kozian, founder and leader of the Stop Whispering project.
Thanks, Bobal. And thank you for laying out that ethical AI use framework. I'm sure you already have everybody's wheels spinning as to what they need to be thinking about within their own organizations. So I'm Laura Kozian. I'm the founder and lead strategist of Stop Whispering, which is a boutique marketing consultancy, marketing and research consultancy that specializes in working with CDFIs and mission-driven organizations. And I launched this consultancy after a 20-year career in the CDFI world, where I worked with organizations including Pursuit, Ascendus, and Acxion. I consider myself an AI optimist. I think that's very different than an expert. That's why I love participating in this panel where we have people with different backgrounds and different perspectives. And I built this sense of AI optimism after two experiences in my career. First, when I first launched my consulting journey, I spent about a year working in an AI data startup called Corel Data. It's the organization that Alex founded. He's not able to join us today, but that's a startup that's using AI to help organizations make better use of their data. And while it was an amazing experience moving from the CDFI world to being embedded in a startup, the only thing I could think about when I was at work was I can't wait to take this information back to the CDFI world and help this space innovate and take some of those, startup-esque principles into our work. And the second experience is having led this JP Morgan Chase funded report that Bubble just referenced. I had the opportunity to speak with more than 10 leaders from CDFI and entrepreneurial support organizations or ESOs, and then also crunch data from a pool of 40 to 45 CDFIs from the OFN Connect community that answered a survey about how they are and are not thinking about using AI, what are their needs, motivations, wants, and concerns. So a lot of the perspective that I'll draw on today comes from that report. So great to be here today, and I think I'll turn it over to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Bobo and Laura. And yeah, so I would say that in terms of framing, my approach is really more like a balanced approach to AI, both use and also development. But as a way of introduction, I'm Michael Lakilmi, Chief AI Officer with the National Fair Housing Alliance, which is a civil rights organization that is solely committed to eliminating any form of discrimination in housing and also lending. And the vision of the organization is really a healthy, resilient, and well-resourced communities that are free from discrimination so that everyone has the resources they need to thrive. And given that AI is really a tool that is impacting everything that is connected to housing, and that includes education, employment, and credit, even transportation and health, which are all connected to housing. So it goes without saying that there's a lot of interest that the National Fair Housing Alliance has in making sure that AI use in housing, lending, and other related areas are safe, responsible, and also trustworthy and also secure. So as part of my role within the organization as the Chief AI Officer, so I lead a team that we call RAIL, R-A-I-L, Responsible AI Lab. And the vision of the lab is AI systems and also even other innovations or technologies like quantum computing that promote inclusion, equity within housing, lending, and related areas, while also avoiding discrimination and segregation. And prior to joining the organization, so I've had the privilege of, having hands-on experience on developing AI systems in insurance, within a startup, a fintech, to be precise, and then also in banking. So I'm looking forward to engaging conversation that will deliver, actionable items that the audience can actually begin to work on immediately after the presentation.
Thanks, Michael. Before we jump into questions I have for the two of you as well, I'd love to just take a moment, and given your background also, can you help us make sure that the audience also understands a little bit of the difference between when we talk about AI versus machine learning versus generative AI, which is also newer to even, more folks in the field. Try to help us get some crisp definitions of the three before we jump into questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that comes across as a trivia question, but I will tell you that it's by no means trivia, because even at the federal level, state and local, right? Even on the international stage, there is no consensus on exactly what AI is and how to define it. But to really frame it, what AI is, especially within housing lending, and as it relates to its many applications within the CDFI community, I would say that first, both machine learning and of course Gen AI, they are types of AI. But then when you think about AI, it's really helpful to think about the infrastructure that are behind it so that at least it's going to be really helpful in terms of like what role or where CDFIs actually come in when we talk about AI, right? So I like to say that when we talk about AI, you want to think about the data that goes into the system that enable it to make some, decisions. And you also want to think about the infrastructure, the compute infrastructure, the data centers that you need. You also need to be clear on exactly what problems you're trying to solve, because the type of problems would actually determine what type of AI you really want to bring to bear. And you also need to think about how the policies, the recommendations, or policies that you put on top of the decisions coming out of the systems are actually related to AI systems. So it's helpful to think of it as a system, not just like a single entity that is, living on its own island. So that said, you want to think about a computer-based system that does one of the following things. So it's used to make prediction. An example of prediction is if you want to underwrite a loan, chances are that in this time and age, it's automated. So you're using some type of AI, and that includes classification systems. For example, credit scoring system, they're using AI. So when you're making prediction about, for example, risk of delinquency rate, right? And two, it's also used to make explanations. So sometimes, if you want to write up, or respond to an inquiry, and you want to explain that away, there are a lot of AI systems now that you can use to explain your decision. So a computer-based system that is making prediction, explanation, and there are also systems that are in place to actually make prescription. So if you observe that, for example, a loan that needs some corrections and you're trying to actually do root cause analysis, so there are AI systems or application in place that you could use to make prescription about what needs to be course corrected. And there are also applications or AI systems that are being used to actually make decision, right? So though, one of the things we talk about is what is the role that human plays in decision making, but depending on the level of automation, there are AI systems that actually make that decision. So it's helpful to frame AI as a tool that fits into one of those four buckets that I mentioned. Now, specifically to machine learning. So machine learning is a type of AI that leverages algorithms to actually understand the patterns that you have in your data so that it can make prediction. For example, when it comes to machine learning, you need either a well-defined objective. For example, you want to underwrite, or what is the price or the loan term? What should that be, right? And in marketing applications, you may not have a well-defined objective. You may just have some groups or demographics, and you want to identify personnel or clusters within that group. So you use machine learning in that particular area. And when it comes to generative AI, so broadly speaking, that is a type of AI that you use to generate content. And the content could be images, it could be audio, it could be text, and other types of data.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And that's a lot of the newer sort of ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera. So we can talk about, we're probably slightly less likely to talk about that so much in this conversation, but just to give everybody sort of a similar grounding in what we mean. So you started to talk a little bit about bias and data sets. And I think that's, partly where I wanted to start off the conversation with you and Laura. I remember when I was at the think tank, part of the research we had done is sort of where is AI currently used in decision-making use cases, right? So in criminal justice sentencing, lending decisioning, and hiring, all use cases where, at least when I was at the think tank in 2017, 2018, were live use cases, starting with facial recognition software in cities that was going up to be like sort of smart cities, technology-wise. But when we think about equity and bias in AI, any of those data sets that have existed have often been trained on what has been seen as the successful data in that industry, right? So when you think about lending or hiring, the data sets used to train that AI algorithm are trained on who is seen as successful in hiring or promotions in leadership, who is seen as successful in lending and credit scores, et cetera. Much of which our industry was tackled to fix, right? Or to ameliorate in some way, knowing that those decisionings and that data sets are trained on data that has often in the past been discriminatory towards populations that are low income or underserved in different ways. So how do we then tackle when we think about bringing in existing algorithms into our field that could very quickly accelerate that bias in ways that we could never potentially put that genie back in the bottle? How do we then set those guardrails? If you can give us an example or a key sort of risk you have identified and how you are trying to sort of ameliorate or tackle equity or bias in your use cases or in your field or organization. Laura, I'd love to start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, it's such a big question, and I thought about it a lot. And the phrasing of the question kind of bugs me a little bit. And I want to encourage us as an industry to kind of flip that question and say, okay, AI has the potential for so much bias. How do we ameliorate that bias? How do we manage for that bias as we move forward? And I encourage us as leaders to flip that question around and say, how can AI actually help us solve for some of the bias that exists in the industry? I've worked in the industry for 20 years. I've seen data sets. I've sat in on loan committees. And despite all the DEI and anti-bias training in the world, you're still having human beings who are a little bit biased and always will be making decisions. So, could there be a future in which we turn decision making over responsibly to AI having removed bias from data sets or having found the right tools and technology to have an AI forward process that eliminates bias? Like, as an AI optimist, I think we can get there. I think it's going to take a lot of problem solving and collaboration. But as an industry, I really want to encourage us not to see this issue of bias as being a roadblock, but rather like orange cones to nimbly and slowly at times navigate around.
I appreciate the orange cones analogy. That's a good visual for my brain to hold on to. Michael, I'd love to bring you in to think about how do you sort of design for acknowledging and or setting guardrails around equity and bias in the AI you are AIs that you are likely using or have experimented with.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for that question. So, and just like I mentioned earlier, that my approach to this conversation and also even like the strategy that we're implementing in housing and lending is really more or less like a balanced approach where that means that we assess the challenges and we also assess the opportunities. And it's really important that, in as much as we try to innovate and adopt some of these tools, right, within lending, right? We also make sure that we're paying close attention to mitigating some of the risks. Because to your point, especially when you think about historical issues such as redlining, right? And the moment we think about redlining as an example, one may think that, well, we no longer have redlining as an official illegal discriminatory practice, but the evidence of that is actually rife in many of the data that we see in the communities that we serve. But that said, the fact is that when it comes to AI, right, it's a disruptive force. And by disruptive, I mean in a positive sense, depending on how those who are adopting them choose to responsibly leverage it, right? So it's disrupting our financial system that channels, for example, credit and capital to the LMI, low and moderate income communities. And in fact, there is a lot of evidence out there that shows that people of color that are, represented in the communities that we serve, they are disproportionately unbanked or underbanked. And that means that if you're, for example, thinking of using mainstream automation systems or AI systems that only depend on traditional data, chances are that they may actually be harmed or left out. And to a point where these structural inequities can actually be leveraged or amplified by this AI system to lock people out. But just like there is no warmth, right, without cold, and there's also no darkness without light or on switch without off switch, right? So there's opportunities and then there's also risk and challenges. So I can speak, I think you asked about one or two examples how we're using this. So there are AI systems that we have used, especially so we applied to underwriting and pricing. They actually show that with intentional adoption, intentional design and development, you could have AI remove some of these historical discrimination or bias or patterns in data. Specifically, there is a fairness technique, which is a type of AI system that we used on underwriting and also pricing. And so what it actually shows that when we apply the technique to mortgage underwriting and pricing, it resulted in reducing racial disparities in loan approval by more than 13% without compromising on the performance of the system itself. And it's significantly more than 20% lower borrowing cost for Black and Hispanic applicants. So such systems, they exist out there. And of course, there's a lot of other applications, right, of AI systems that are more or less like gatekeepers keeping people out. So that said, our approach here is that we'll assess the risk and then also look at many of the well-intentioned frameworks that help us really understand what those risks are so that when we have humans in the loop, they are informed about what the risks are, what they need to monitor or watch out for, and how to really alert people who have authorities to rein in the systems so that they can be adapted and corrected.
Thanks, Michael. You and Laura both started to touch on something that I was going to take us into next, which is all of these systems, all of what you're describing, right, in terms of how you design then that algorithm towards fairness, and Laura's conversation around sort of no training is going to solve for that implicit bias, which I could not agree with more. How then do we balance the right use of AI and automation in our organizations with the human expertise that we also have in our organizations, the wisdom we've also tried to cultivate right within our organizations around being responsible community lenders? What are some ways that AI can and should complement that expertise that we have either within our organizations or staff or board to not only design towards fairness, but also ensure accountability? And one thing I'll just kind of throw in there is that you mentioned the phrase human in the loop, which I think about 6 or 8 years ago, there were starting to be these sort of ethical frameworks around NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, the Singapore and United Kingdom sort of sandbox for AI, and the rights and governance sort of frameworks that we're creating around those, where the conversations around what is the right role of the human in the loop, right, versus I think what Salesforce has also recently helmed in their ethical AI team, like human at the helm, to try to make sure that there are, in fact, humans with critical thinking and ethical training mindsets, approaches, really thinking about the right use and decisioning of AI tools they use. So would love to try to understand a little bit more how each of your organizations tackles balancing that automation with the human expertise you also have on your teams. And Laura, I'd love to turn to you first, if that's okay, to bring forward some of, I think, the optimism into the human and bias training you were referencing earlier.
Sure. Definitely optimistic, but also realistic. And I think, even outside of the bias considerations, there's reasons why humans need to be in the loop when using AI at this point in time. And that's because AI is very new. It is the Wild West out there. And even if you're just using basic chatbots, they do what we call hallucinate, which is they're literally just wrong. And if you ever want to try, seeing this, like ask ChatGPT to write a bio on you, give it your name, give it your background, ask for the bio. Chances are it'll write a bio that sounds 90% like you, but they're going to get some of those key details wrong. And imagine if that was happening to, a marketing material that was going out or a customer service response. So, because of where the technology is at, humans have to be in the loop. And I think this is good as organizations onboard to AI too. I tried Googling this fact before coming to this panel and I got sidetracked, but I think when they launched the elevator back in the 1800s, the reason it was staffed with a human is not because it needed to, is because it made other humans comfortable. So as your organization onboards to AI, it's an onboarding comfort building tool that is definitely good, and I encourage it. Some organizations are considering, human in the loop or human at the helm. But you can also flip that and say, okay, this is AI in the loop. This is still going to be an extraordinarily human-driven process, but we're going to turn to AI for certain points of efficiency. I'm a marketer by nature, a marketer at heart, so I may be biased when I say this, but I think that there's a lot of marketing use cases out there that demonstrate this really, really well. And I think where I've seen CDFIs move forward with a lot of AI innovation is on the marketing front. I think it's because it's a lower risk use case. It's really easy to deploy generative AI, kind of at a low cost in a marketing setting. That's a whole different conversation. But I think there's been a lot of cool things happening. So I think our successful use case that kind of balances human in the loop versus AI in the loop is content creation for marketing. So for one of my CDFI clients, we've used AI to cut the amount of time it takes to produce financial education content, training curriculum by 50% by using a process that's probably 60% AI driven and 40% human driven. And we've created this cool ping pong between AI and human. So first we use AI to create a curriculum outline. Then we have a human vet those outlines. Then we ping pong it across the net back to AI, where we have a human speak to the outline and kind of give it color and context and unique insight. We transcribe that using AI. We feed that back into an AI chatbot to create an article draft, where a human probably spends anywhere from 2 to 3 hours editing that up and giving it that really human tone. So, again, we have this healthy ping pong of AI to human back to AI. And how can we bring that mindset, outside of marketing, where a lot of this AI innovation is incubating, into other parts of the CDFI world, such as lending, customer experience, financial operations, et cetera.
Thank you. I appreciate that example to help make it a little bit more tangible, right? How an organization is tackling that balance. It really makes me think of one of the ways we use AI at PCB is in our data analytics work, where without sharing sort of private customer information, to complement the surveys that we do every year to really understand sort of, are we measurably moving our clients towards economic mobility and wealth building pathways? We have started using a voice AI to really capture worker sentiment, so that the sentiment analysis that comes out of that research really helps our data team then listen to both our clients and their workers in a privacy, anonymous way for the workers, but in a way that we can aggregate sort of what is working, what's not working, how are workers in these client businesses really feeling about their financial health and wellness. And so similarly, and maybe it's not quite as ping pong as what you're describing, but it's a complementarity that isn't done by the human, but is read by and analyzed by the team in a nice sort of complementary way.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that use case when I spoke with you for the report. And the thing that stands out to me about it is you're actually creating a more human experience by using a machine because the machine can capture intricacies that humans would miss in a million phone conversations where you're asking for feedback, and a machine can crunch that really quickly and retain that personal nature. So I think that's a beautiful case study.
Yeah, or share anonymous information they wouldn't share with
Exactly. Yep.
a human. Michael,
And yeah, so you may be surprised that I'm actually going to take a totally different approach to the concept of human in the loop or human at the helm. So there are two keywords there. We need to really put them apart so that we really understand what roles both of them play. So we need to really assess exactly what we mean by the loop, because depending on at what point human comes into the system, it may actually be too late to mitigate some of these issues. And when we talk about human in the loop, there is always human in the process that develops these applications. So any AI system you could think of right now was actually put together by human. But the question is, what type of human do you actually have in the system? Is it just a system that is only put together by those who have the tech expertise? And full disclosure, my PhD is in math, so I qualify as one of the people that have like the tech expertise. But I've seen in all the places that I've worked that if you only staff your development team with people who only focus on the data, on the algorithm, then you usually end up with harmful applications. So it's really important that we expand what exactly we mean by human that are actually in the process and what we really mean by the loop, right? So what I would actually advocate for is not human in the loop, and neither is it like human at the helm, because again, that may really be too late. But it's really more of, I'm thinking about the question in terms like co-pilots. Many of us, if we fly, right? So you probably wouldn't appreciate a flight system where it is just manual, probably in the Stone Ages. Even if the ticket goes for like $1 to fly from here across the ponds, you probably will turn that down because you feel like it's not safe. And the same way, if it is just fully autonomous, right? You may have reasons to be concerned because not recently, a few years ago, there were instances where just because of the updates to the software that power some of these systems, and the pilots who were actually working on them, they're still trying to learn on the job about how the updates work. That led to a series of, couple of mishaps. So the thinking here is really co-pilot, where when you think about each stage of the development, from, for example, deciding what problem you want to solve, do you only have the business executives who are trying to like optimizing on the profits, right, at the table deciding what problem, or you really have a whole community that are asking hard questions? Is this really the right problem that we want to solve? Do we need an AI system to actually solve this? Or this is something that we can also just leverage based on our domain knowledge, right, that we have? Because it's not every problem in a business environment that you actually want to solve with an AI system. So you have the right human groups actually working on that, tearing that apart to make sure that, yes, we're working on the right problem. The data itself, right? Just trying to make sure that you are protecting different communities to make sure that they are well represented in the data so that what eventually comes at the downstream later on is already mitigated. When it comes to making decisions about some of these systems, right? I understand that, for example, CDFIs, given some of the limited resources that we have, we may not have the financial wherewithal, right, to put these systems together. But then you also want to think about different testing considerations that need to go into evaluating what systems that you need to have, and on like that. So just to summarize, we need to make sure that the humans that are, in the form of a co-pilot arrangement, they are well informed so that they can make decisions that represent the communities that we serve at each of the stages of the development, not just waiting at the end and just waving hands or pointing fingers at the sky to make sure that, well, everything is fine. Because at the end of the day, whoever is using the system is still liable and also accountable for the decisions that are being made or recommendations that are being made by these systems.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing all of that. I thought you were going to say you're going to go in a completely different direction and share that you are actually a robot speaking today. I also promise that Michael's comments around the Copilot framework were not sponsored by Microsoft.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. That's one of the issues here. Just like OpenAI, which is just a concept, and yeah. So by Copilot, I by no means I'm not referring to like Microsoft Copilot, but and that was why I use the flight analogy that a Copilot. But please and please, I'm not promoting any of these applications. And given that I work for a civil rights organization, I shouldn't even be promoting that. So yes. Using Copilot does not mean Microsoft Copilot. Good catch.
Sorry, y'all. I use dark humor and sarcasm to get through life. And there, Michael was not trying to put you on the spot. I really appreciate the analogy because I think it also really speaks to the metaphor Laura used earlier about the ping pong, right? That it's got to be a partnership so that it's optimizing how we make decisions, maybe helping us get through analysis better, but that it's a partnership. I think this is really what I'm hearing from both of you fundamentally. So let's talk a little bit about where then do you look to when you think about the ethical adoption of technologies in your organizations? And the applications of that as a community lender, is there a set of either guiding principles or a framework you each have turned to or learned from that has helped you to sort of build your organizational framework for what you will adopt, how you will adopt, and these guardrails? I know for us, since I shared some of those value statements for PC earlier, Michael, to your point about sort of who is making those decisions around which AI are used or for what use cases, it's a really cross-cutting working group across our organization that is not just led by our executives trying to optimize for sort of profit decisioning, but really coming from a place of equity and ethics first and foremost, where most of that team has gone through that sort of data equity training, and certainly the leaders of that working group have. And we're really thinking about the compatibility or not of AI with civil rights and rights-based frameworks. So I'm happy to follow up with Sindhu with some of the links to references that she might, or the OFN team might be able to send out as part of the follow-up. But I'm really curious if you each have sort of something that has been a North Star for each of you in setting up your organization's frameworks. Laura, let's start with you.
Sure. I think that I actually did a session on this framework at the November OFN gathering that was hyper specific to a marketing context, but I also think it's specific to broader organizational thinking on AI. And, the framework, the North Star is to start with your organizational strategy. Like every organization should have one. If you don't have a 3 to 5 year strategy, that's a whole different webinar. But you need to be using that as your North Star in where you are applying AI use cases. For example, if your strategy goal is to increase customer satisfaction, you want to have a really amazing Net Promoter Score. You need to improve your customer service. Your use cases are going to be deploying customer service chatbots or using AI intelligence to provide product recommendations or financial education. And then stay laser focused on those use cases. If your goal is to shorten the time it takes to approve a loan by, say, 2 days, you're going to be exploring AI tools that can help organize documents. Maybe draft loan reports from recorded interviews. Like, I hope I'm not opening up a can of worms by suggesting that that's a possibility. Explore the ethics around that. But rather than starting with the shiny tools that you see out there, because to be clear, there's 20,000 AI tools and growing. start with your goals and encourage your staff to really ideate AI use cases that are going to laser focus in on those goals. And if your staff come to you with an AI tool that they'd like to try, really challenge them to communicate how it maps to an established organizational goal. So this is what's going to keep you mission focused, and it's going to allow for AI experimentation within boxes that are really going to move the needle when it comes to being able to demonstrate results for making investments in AI, which ultimately we need to do to unlock more resources for AI development in this industry. It's expensive. We need money to do this. We need to free this money up with our boards. We need to free this money up from funders. So we need to be demonstrating, quick wins and amazing results down the pike.
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to come back to that in a minute around the collaborative concept you were just teeing up. But Michael, I'd love to hear from you first and sort of what's been helpful for you in your organization.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'll be happy to share insights from what we see in housing lending, and that also include some of the applications that we've developed, but more so in consulting capacity with some of these companies, which I will not be able to disclose based on some of the agreements that we have, but up to a point where I think some of the insights from them may inform strategies that many of you all on the call may want to explore, because yeah, strategy is very, very important, right? So now to eventually come up with a strategy to inform adoption or governance, it's probably helpful to think about it in terms of like four buckets. So when it comes to like AI system, you may want to think about, okay, are you playing as an organization the role of developers? Because if your role here is that you want to develop your own AI system in-house, your adoption strategy is going to be different, right? And the second bucket here is that, are you deploying? So is this something that is already developed by, let's say, a third party? And the role you're just playing is that you want to deploy it or integrate it into your system, right? Or the third one is, are you playing a role of like what I'll call like a vendor in a way, right? Which I don't think applies to majority of us on this call, but the strategy is going to be different. But I'm thinking the fourth bucket is probably what applies here, which is user. So because again, when you think about the cost of developing all these systems, probably it makes business sense to actually let those who have all the resources to develop, deploy, and even partner with some vendors, and then you're using it in your different lines of business. So the recommendations that I'm going to be making are just based on that assumption that you are a user that is looking to actually adopting some of these frameworks. So that said, I think there are three ways to think about it as a user, right? And one of the things that you probably hear is that data is the new oil, right? So there is one advantage here that CDFIs has, and that is really the data. By the virtue of the communities that you all serve, I can tell you assuredly that mainstream developers or mainstream financial institutions are even begging to have access to the data that represent your communities, because many of the issues they have in the products they develop is really because the data does not represent the communities that you serve. So first, you want to make sure that you have the right security or cyber security framework in place. And there are a lot of standards, even from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have what they call like cybersecurity framework 2.0 that attends to a lot of things. So you want to make sure that your data, which is the new oil, which is your competitive edge, is really protected with your cybersecurity resilient framework. So that's very important. And then the second strategy is really AI governance. So again, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they have different frameworks. For example, for AI, the traditional AI or generative AI, what they call risk management framework. And my shameless plug, even the National Fair Housing Alliance, we have our own PPM framework, which stands for Purpose, Process, and Monitoring Framework, that you can use when it comes to, for example, governing the use of these systems, as a fully automated system or a system that is transparent or whatever lies in between. And the last thing I also like to say is that there are at least 6 principles that you need to build your AI risk management framework around. And that's very, very important. Similar to what Bubble shared earlier. So first, you want to make sure that as you think about your risk management framework, governance framework, first, you want to make sure that you are using a system that has been tested and proven to be non-discriminatory. Because like I shared earlier, if you're using an AI system that violates many of the anti-discrimination laws, right, you're still going to be accountable for that. And then you also want to make sure that it preserves privacy. So there are a lot of privacy framework, privacy enhancing technologies that you can build into your policies. And then 2, 3, you want to make sure that it is also reliable. Reliability here lies in terms of like the performance of the system. You do not want to adopt or use a system that performs differently on different demographics, because again, that may expose you to reputational risk. And fourth, you want to make sure that your system is explainable, right? We've heard a lot of things about, oh, AI systems, they are black boxes and all that, but there are a lot of tools and frameworks out there that can help you to really explain or reason out these decisions. And the last one I'm going to say briefly, because I think we've dwelled on that as you consider your management framework, is the principle of controllability. You want to make sure that the systems we are using, they are controllable. And I really like that because I'm still advocating for humans that are knowledgeable enough, that knows when to turn off or turn on the tap when, depending on the outcomes of the system. So those are really what we consider when it comes to making decisions about what AI system to adopt or not.
Thanks, Michael. Your last comment around the controllability totally sent me into Terminator. What was it called? Rogue and was no longer controllable. And that was the visual that came to my head. Probably not the most helpful visual to bring into this conversation, but very, very, probably very apt. I wanted to come back to something. So we're getting to the end of our time together. And I think as we think about, marrying our AI cautionism, our pragmatism, optimism, enthusiasm, sort of, and or just AI confusion. I think people are all over the place, particularly in this field, right, where there isn't necessarily a ton of existing AI or technology capacity to begin with. You used a comment earlier around sort of not just using an existing AI that has already shown to, potentially exacerbate discrimination, but having built something inside your organization that has shown to be, I think you said 13% more likely to make equitable decisions, which is fantastic. And Laura, I think something you and I talked about maybe when we were interviewing for your report or in the prep call is also, right, in the collaborative nature of the CDFI field. Very few of us each individually have the resources to do what Michael just described, right? Like, I would love for PCV to be able to build our own algorithm using our data for what is equitable in our lending practices. But the amount of like investment that's going to take is decent, right, for our size of organization. A few much larger national CDFIs have started to build something like that, have more capacity or investment or resources to do that. But what might it look like in our field if there was a collaborative sort of technology that was trained on where CDFIs have really maximized for reaching low-income and underserved communities? Give us a sense of sort of what conversations in your range of interviews potentially revealed any such interest or movements even.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about this collaboration point. So I'm so glad that you brought it up. And, in the interviews, again, I spoke with 10 leaders, yourself included, Bubble, and, got insights on paper from 35 other organizations. And the appetite for collaboration is high. I think the first place where we need to collaborate as an organization, and this is just my own personal opinion, having seen the research, is we need to arrive on a common definition or lowest common denominator for what using AI means. Measure what matters. We can't measure it. We can't prove to funders that we can leverage their funding for increased impact, leverage their investment in AI for increased impact if we can't measure what using AI means. So we need to arrive at that common definition. And then other areas of collaboration that others, really identified is building lists of vetted tools. Like, we're all going through this question of do we build an AI or do we buy software that it already exists that, has models that would be applicable to the CDFI world. I forget where I was going with that. Shoot. Yeah, collaboration around what is a list of vetted tools because, like the predatory loan market, like there's a lot of fly-by-night players in the AI space too. And then also collaboration on some of the research and development or R&D work that needs to be done. It's exactly what Michael was describing. It takes a lot of testing and failing and testing and failing again to get at any technology that is going to stick and make sense in the long term. And I really worry about this industry's ability to have a long enough runway to make it unless we collaborate on getting that work done. So I would love to see leaders in this space step up and form these collaborative groups. I would love to see the funding community recognize that CDFIs have the ability to amplify impact through this type of collaboration and through investment in AI and to be funding some of this activity. I think it's a really, really important conversation.
Thanks, Laura. That was a great way to segue into our closing and thinking about, right, if we're revisiting this conversation in 5 years or so, what would we want to look back on and say, okay, there was a positive role that AI potentially played in our community development finance space. What would you want that to look like? And I think very similar, or maybe building off of what you were sharing, I think it would be really intriguing if whatever else is happening in our field, I think the collaborative nature, a lot of interesting things we've seen over the last few years that have built, I think, more collaboration muscle than may have existed before. Again, opportunities to innovate out of crisis. What does it look like for us to potentially create sort of a CDFI AI sandbox that is supported and has some guardrails we can all agree on, to build sort of that algorithm that is more predictive of serving the markets that have been historically left behind by financial systems, and actually solve a problem we're all trying to solve in our own ways at some meaningful scale, with some values alignment. Michael, I'd be curious if there's sort of one thing you'd want to be able to look back at in 5 years and see as progress or a point of success of the use of AI in our field.
Yeah, so I think I like to say that I'm so glad that the CDFI community is thinking about leveraging many of the opportunities that come with AI. Because I remember talking to my CEO and leader after we applied the AI system, or after we got the results that I shared, right? One of the questions we had was, what are the CDFIs doing with AI? How are they going to leverage it? And this is coming from our observation that the data that power the mainstream applications do not represent, for example, the communities of color, the LMI consumers, women, and also minority groups, right, who experience challenges in accessing credit. So now that we're talking about it, I think that's really a good thing. And the collaborative environment that Laura mentioned. So I was thinking, well, what are some of the challenges that may be, preempting some of these organizations from coming together? There are a lot of reasons, but one immediate one that I could think of is really, the fear of what happens to my data, what happens to my asset, and the fact that, well, we're all competing for the same pie, right? But I'll tell you, the more you dig into how some of these big AI systems are working, they actually collaborate on the data. And whatever the concerns are, there are technologies, infrastructure to, for example, ameliorate or address some of the apprehensions that we have. So in 5 years, when I look back, my expectation is that, the CDFI, they've come together to also collaborate on at least building a federated, I'm going to call it like a federated AI system that, serves more or less, if I could wear my biology hat now, a symbiotic environment where everyone benefits because they're all contributing on the data. So that would be what I would like to see 5 years time when I look back.
Thanks, Michael. We went from Terminator to Star Trek references. I love it. We're at time. I really appreciate you both joining me for this conversation. Totally acknowledge there is a lot of movement and conversation around AI in our field, AI more broadly. There's going to be a lot more investment and pushes for AI into our field. When in doubt, slow down and really think about your organizational values before using and bringing in AI into your field or organization. But please know that folks like us and resources OFN will share is here for you and to support. Sindhu, you want to close us out?
Thanks so much, Bobo and Michael and Laura. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspectives today and your experience and expertise. It was really valuable and insightful and hopefully helps everyone think about that bigger picture of how we should be using AI and for what purpose and to what end. And so thank you everyone who joined us today for listening and staying tuned. We hope you'll join us tomorrow for the last webinar in the Connect Plus Forum programming or at future OFN events. So thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.